This mock draft, I think some people out there would argue it's pretty silly. It comes from Peter Schrager, who's one of the hosts of Good Morning Football. Now, he does this every year, and he makes note in the headline for this NFL.com mock draft that this is not what he would do. It's what he's hearing from his sources around the league. So with that, I give you what Schrager has the Texans doing at the very top of the draft. Number 1, Bryce Young's the pick for the Carolina Panthers. Number 2, C.J. Stroud is the pick for the Indianapolis Colts. A projected trade with the Texans, Schrager writes, would Indianapolis trade DeForest Buckner and the number 4 overall pick to move up 2 spots? I think Houston would have to listen if it's offered. Remember, new Texans head coach DeMeco Ryans was with Buckner for 3 seasons in San Francisco, and Defoe just restructured his contract. If Buckner's not included in the trade, how about adding a 2nd or 3rd round pick instead? It's also worth noting that Stroud is represented by the same agent as Deshaun Watson. I wonder if this could play any role in the selection of the Ohio State quarterback based on the way Watson's time with the Texans ended. So, Cody, this is a deal that's on the table. The Texans make this deal. They pass on C.J. Stroud, and instead he goes to the Colts. How would you be feeling in the moment?
Boy, DeForest Buckner is a really nice player to get in this trade and then still have the number 4 overall selection to do whatever you'd like with it. I was unaware DeForest Buckner was able to be had. And this sort of changes the whole conversation because you would have thought that the price for Indianapolis to go up a couple of spots is not some crazy price, but in the division, you're helping them out with the QB. You want a little sweetener here. DeForest Buckner's one hell of a sweetener, especially the fact that DeMeco Ryans coached him in San Francisco and he's familiar with him. Boy, that'd be a hard conversation to pass up.
Is that a yes or a no?
I'll do this. I would do this. I'd take DeForest Buckner and 4 for 2. I would do this. With the hope that 4 is then a quarterback.
Right. It'd have to be a quarterback.
In my world, I would hope that it would be a quarterback, and it would indeed be a quarterback at 4.
Yeah, look, if the Texans don't plan on drafting the guy the Colts want, then why would you not make this move? I mean, you've got a chance to bring in one of the better players in the league. DeForest Buckner would come in here and immediately be the best player on this defense. Plus, you could still end up with the quarterback that you were going to take at number 2 at number 4. Like, let's say the Texans have their eye on Will Levis and the Colts want C.J. Stroud. Okay, well, the Texans can get the quarterback they want and DeForest Buckner in the trade. And the Colts get the guy that they want. This is different to me. I know we've talked about the Deshaun Watson situation and how the Texans were not willing to even negotiate with Indianapolis last offseason in regards to a Watson trade. This is completely different. I mean, Watson was established. This guy was a borderline top 5 quarterback in football when he requested the trade. Right now, we're talking about a guy who's never stepped foot on an NFL field. I said it earlier. There are some flaws in C.J. Stroud's game. There's no guarantee that guy is going to be a franchise quarterback. Really? You're telling me a guy out of Ohio State in that system is a lock to be really good in the NFL? Give me a break. Big difference between those 2 scenarios. So I don't know if this is realistic. I don't know if Indianapolis has any interest in trading Buckner. I'm with you, Cody. I did not know this was even something that's been discussed by anybody around the league. But if that is an actual offer, and once again, the Texans don't have any interest in taking the quarterback that the Colts want, then I think you have to do it.
And if you're the Houston Texans and you believe that C.J. Stroud's not any good, or certainly the level that you wouldn't draft him with the number 2 pick, you wouldn't be worried that the Colts are coming up for that guy. Like, we don't think he's any good. Let's bank on that and get a good defender. And even if there was a conversation about, okay, well, we don't know what the Colts are doing, but we really like DeForest Buckner, we're going to move down, and let's pretend the Colts took Will Levis at 2. It's a lot easier if you were less interested in Stroud just taking him at 2. It's a lot easier to take him at 4 if you've also gotten DeForest Buckner as well.
The only thing with Buckner that would, I don't know if it's the word concern, but would you be better off maybe getting picks so you can get a younger player who's cost control? Like, yeah, the guy redid his contract. He's not going to kill you from that standpoint, but he is 29 years old. So by the time this team is ready to be really good, what does DeForest Buckner look like when he's on the wrong side of 30? Now, he plays a position where you would think he could still play into his mid-30s. Like, Calais Campbell's still one of the best interior defensive tackles. The guy's going to be 38 years old this year. So maybe DeForest Buckner could be that type of player, but that'd be the one thing. It's like, would I rather maybe get some draft picks instead of a really good player in Buckner, knowing my team's not going to be that good anyway next year?
Yeah, but, I mean, what Schrager talks about what it could be a second or a third round pick. There's not a second or a third round pick that you can bank on being better than DeForest Buckner.
No. But that pick is now under cost control, team control for 4 more years.
Yeah, I mean, this organization's got money, and you don't have a quarterback to pay anytime soon, and the only other guy that needs to get paid got paid.
Yeah, this is a splash move that we were hoping they would make in free agency that they didn't really make, right? I mean, they obviously got better. They got some good pieces, but they didn't spend on anybody that big. This is spending on somebody big. It's getting, once again, one of the best players at his position in football, and a guy who would come in here and be the best player on this defense right away, a guy who already knows D'Amico Ryans and his system as well. It makes a lot of sense. And look, if you could get a future first-round pick, then okay, but you're not getting that for a team moving up from number 4 to number 2. And draft picks would be day 2 picks in addition to the swap from 2 and 4. I'd rather go with DeForest Buckner, assuming that he still has 3, 4, hopefully more, really, really good years left in him. And, yeah, the Texans, I don't expect them to be competitive in 2023, but 2024, 2025, you hope this team is at least in the playoff conversation. DeForest Buckner goes a long way into making sure you're in that conversation.
So I said I'd be in on this if the number 4 selection was then used on a quarterback. We haven't gotten to what Schrager predicts for the number 4 just yet.
We haven't even gotten to the most wild part of this mock draft yet involving the Texans.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about that next. Peter Schrager's mock draft, a mock draft that he puts together based on the things that he's hearing. We'll talk about what he has the Texans doing now with pick 4 coming up next on ESPN 97.5 and 92.5. Peter Schrager's mock draft. We're in the middle of going through it. It's based on things he's hearing. If you don't know who Peter Schrager is, he's on the show Good Morning Football on the NFL Network each and every weekday morning. He has the Texans trading out of number 2 with the Colts. And the Colts take C.J. Stroud at 2. The Texans get DeForest Buckner, and they're sitting there with the number 4 pick. We might as well tell you who went number 3. That player was Will Anderson, going to the Arizona Cardinals.
If the Texans indeed move out of 2, it does seem less and less likely that the Cardinals will move. Not totally out of the equation or out of the question, but it seems less and less likely that the Cardinals would be able to also make the trade that they would be looking for and get what they need and get what they want out of that.
Think so?
Sticking and picking.
I could see somebody wanting to jump the Texans just to be safe. You would think if the Texans were trading for DeForest Buckner that, hey, they'd still end up taking a quarterback at number 4 to ensure that you get your guy before they get their guy, and you make the move with Arizona at 3. I mean, Peter Schrager doesn't seem to think that I'm right, but I still think there's a good shot that Arizona could deal the pick, even if the Texans move down from 2.
If there's some desire for Levis and Richardson, sure. If that gap exists between those two guys, or between those two guys and Stroud, like we believe there might be, then maybe there's a little less interest.
Now, you said before we went to break, Cody, that, you know what, I'm okay with this trade out of 2 going to 4, as long as the Texans then, at 4, take a quarterback.
Sure.
Well, pick 3, I told you, was not a quarterback, meaning that as of right now, all the quarterbacks besides Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud are available for the Houston Texans.
Okay.
So Peter Schrager has the Texans selecting Tyree Wilson, defensive end from Texas Tech.
Of course he does. Because that's very much within the realm of possibility with this organization.
But don't worry, because at pick 5, the Seahawks take Anthony Richardson.
The Seahawks are interesting as they've visited with all the top 4 quarterbacks and made it very public and known that they were visiting with all 4 of the top
they took
quarterbacks.
selfies with each one.
Yeah. It's one hell of a swing by the Seahawks if they're doing that.
You bought into Geno Smith?
No, I'm not. I wonder if they had a couple of days' notice if Lamar was going to be available, if they'd even done the Geno thing. They'd probably try to get Lamar.
Yeah, I think you're right. I could see them as a team who drafts Anthony Richardson and puts him on the bench for a year, lets him learn under Geno, and then boom, in 2024, he's the guy. That would make sense. They've got a second first-round pick as well, so they could be in the market for a quarterback, even though a lot of people are thinking they're going to go a different direction.
You've been on this with the Seahawks, too. They don't necessarily have to help 2023's roster because they're kind of a fugazi playoff team anyway.
And they're not a Super Bowl contender.
Right.
I know they made the playoffs last year, and in the NFC, I guess they have a shot to make it again next year if Geno Smith can replicate his performance from a season ago. But come on, I mean, they're not on the Eagles level. They're not on the Niners level. They're not on the Cowboys level. They're not making a deep playoff run, which I don't know why you would not address quarterback if you don't have a quarterback if you're in their situation.
I mentioned the Texans and the Seahawks right after because they have a quarterback. Geno's competent. He was a Pro Bowler, and they're going quarterback at 5. But the Texans, according to Peter Schrager, would be passing on all the other quarterbacks to take a defensive player.
That's the big story.
Sounds
here.
about right.
Yeah, you talked about it earlier, Cody. Just the Texans doing things that no other franchise would do. The Texans trading the number 2 pick for a defensive lineman and another defensive lineman would be very unconventional. And by unconventional, I mean very stupid.
Yep.
Looking ahead to the other picks here, let me rapid fire through some of the other selections here. Number 6, the Lions go Jalen Carter. Number 7, the Raiders go Peter Skoronski. Number 8, the Falcons go Nolan Smith. Number 9, the Bears go Christian Gonzalez.
Ooh.
Number 10, the Eagles select running back Bijan Robinson.
Oh, boy.
BK's worst nightmare.
Yeah, I only subscribe to Cody Stoots' mock draft, so he's going to the Falcons at 8. So sorry about that, Schrags. You're wrong here, bud.
Okay, so Bijan at 10 to the Eagles, but BK's not buying it. Now, here's where we might have the first what the hell is happening moment of the draft besides the obvious, the trade the Texans and Colts would be making. Pick 11, Tennessee Titans on the clock. Hendon Hooker is the selection. And Schrager's rationale is essentially, well, Tennessee still has a quarterback in Ryan Tannehill that could be the bridge guy for a year. So if Hendon Hooker needs a year to get healthy coming off the ACL injury, that's the perfect situation for him to go into. So Hendon Hooker before Will Levis is the Texans pick at 12. So they didn't go quarterback at 4, Cody. They wait till 12, and they still end up with a QB, a guy you don't like, but it's still a quarterback, Will Levis at 12.
Man, we've talked about this. Betting on getting a quarterback at 12, one of the top 4 quarterbacks in most people's eyes, at 12 for the Texans is akin to paying your rent or your mortgage with money that you win from a scratch-off ticket. It might work. It's not the best plan to go about things, but it might work.
Well, the tides would have really turned, and Lady Luck would finally be on the Texans' side if they were able to leave the first round with DeForest Buckner, Tyree Wilson, and Will Levis without having to trade up for any of those dudes.
Okay, so I don't love Will Levis as a prospect. I've made that very clear on this show. If this plays out the way Schrager has it playing out, it would be really tough to be super critical of the draft, like of the first round. Like, it'd be tough to be critical of the first round. They got a QB. They got the second best defensive lineman in the draft. And then they got, is DeForest Buckner the best defensive player in the AFC South? Him or Jeffrey Simmons, right?
Yeah.
So you got one of the 2 best defensive players in the AFC South. So you got one of the 2 best defenders in the division. You got the second best defensive lineman, and you got a quarterback?
Well, Malik Collins has to be in that conversation.
So you got one of the 2 best defenders in the AFC South.
No respect.
You got the number 2 defensive line prospect, who's an edge player, and you got a quarterback. I don't like Levis, but if there's no Young, just get one of the quarterbacks. This would be a quarterback. I'd have a hard time saying this was a bad deal.
No, it'd be tough in the moment to criticize, but here's where you'd criticize it. Next year, if C.J. Stroud ends up being really, really good and Will Levis is not, you're going to be saying, we got too cute. We should have just taken Stroud. We didn't take him because, he's represented by Deshaun's agent, or whatever reason will come out after the draft why the Texans didn't want Stroud. That could be thrown in their face if Levis is not a good quarterback.
Sure, I see how long-term it blows up in their face, but I don't see how at the conclusion of Thursday night when the commissioner wraps it up for the night and says, we'll see you tomorrow, how I'm upset or pissed off with how this played out.
This is the best 2023 Houston Texans mock draft that I've seen. I don't expect anything to top this.
Oh!
Sorry. You didn't have DeForest Buckner ending up here.
That's true.
Also, DeForest Buckner, I had not heard his name once in any trade conversation. Like, is he available and no one's known this whole time?
You know what? I sat there today as we were getting ready for the show, and I started thinking, I wonder who this year's A.J. Brown is, where just all of a sudden this guy's available for trade around the draft or during the draft, and you're like, why the hell is that team trading him? Like, that's what happened with A.J. Brown last year. Like, yeah, there was some speculation that maybe, the money was going to be difficult, this or that, and the Titans have been hesitant to pay the guy. The next thing you know, he's on the Philadelphia Eagles, and you're like, well, what the hell's going on here?
Yeah.
So I was wondering who could be this year's A.J. Brown. I was thinking mostly about wide receivers and couldn't come up with a name, but maybe this year's A.J. Brown is DeForest Buckner. Like, I didn't know he was available. I'm glad I called on him.
I wouldn't hate it. Yeah, I don't know how feasible this is, but you said it, Jake. Peter Schrager filled out this mock draft based on conversations he's had around the league. He's not making this stuff up. Somebody out there has told Peter Schrager that this is a legitimate possibility. So sign me up for this, man. I mean, you end up with a quarterback, one of the best defensive players in the draft, and one of the best defensive players in the league. I mean, look, in real time, if we get to next Thursday and the Texans don't draft a quarterback with their first pick, wherever it may be, and you're sitting waiting until number 12, hoping that one of the quarterbacks is there, that's going to be a stressful 3.5 hours. I think that's about how long it takes for the first 11 picks of the draft to go these days. That's going to be stressful and annoying and frustrating, but ultimately, if you get lucky, it usually doesn't happen for the Texans, but if you get lucky and one of those quarterbacks is there at 12 and you end up with all three of those guys, that's pretty damn good. I mean, we've been talking about, hey, the Texans trading back in to the first round and ending up with 3 players in the draft. You end up with 2 players with your picks and you get DeForest Buckner as well. That's another celebration to be had here in Houston if that's how this thing ultimately shakes out.
And it essentially didn't cost you any other selections. It just cost you 2 spots in the move back in the first round. It's not like it cost you 33 or any of your third-round picks or your fourth-round pick, which Casario was gushing about that pick at the top of the 4th round like it was basically another third-rounder yesterday.
Yeah, he's trying to trade that one, isn't he?
Yeah, right.
Sure sounds like he's trying to increase the value for other teams out there.
Sure. But, man, I'd have a real hard time, even though I'm not a Will Levis guy, I'd have a real hard time being upset with that shakeout if Peter Schrager's right. I've never wanted Peter Schrager to be more right in my life.
You'd rather you be right than
I'd
Peter
rather
Schrager
me be right. Sure, yeah.
You'd rather have Bryce Young and then take whoever at 12 versus all of this wheeling and dealing.
I'd rather that mock draft we read a couple weeks ago that had Bryce Young and Bijan be right than me. But I'll take a variety of outcomes that include some good players ending up on the Texans.
I'm just looking at some of the other picks that Schrager has in this mock. I'm laughing at the pick he has the Packers making at 15. Jackson Smith and Jigba, the wide receiver from Ohio State. The irony of the Packers finally going receiver in the first round after they trade away Aaron Rodgers, because that was the big thing, right? They never drafted a receiver in the first round during Rodgers' time in Green Bay, so they do it right after they finally trade the guy.
That'd be some top-notch trollage.
That would be the ultimate irony on draft night. My God. I just can't get over Hendon Hooker, though, going 11. Seems too high.
The write-up that he put in there, too, this might shock the world, or by the time the draft arrives, it might not be that big of a shock at all. Schrager's talking to somebody who loves him some Hendon Hooker. Did Peter Schrager talk to Mike Tannenbaum?
Oh, must have.
He's got the Hooker hard on. We found someone else in the media. First Tannenbaum, or as BK called him, Michael Lombardi.
Yes.
And now Peter Schrager.
Peter Schrager, big fan of a hooker.
Now, can we get to a mock draft from Kay Adams, perhaps? I know she's no longer on Good Morning Football, but I'd love to break down a Kay Adams mock, perhaps.
I got nothing to add to that.
Okay.
Hey, everyone. Big thanks for watching this clip from our radio show, and thank you for making the Wheelhouse the most viewed Houston sports show on YouTube. If you like our show, then make sure you subscribe to my channel for daily clips from the show. And, of course, you can listen to all 4 hours of the Wheelhouse each and every day on ESPN 97.5 FM or 92.5 FM from 3 to 7 every afternoon.